Hi, this is Miss Monclair, coming to you live from your home, I'm guessing. And since we're switching things up and flipping the class around, I thought we'd flip the class around a little bit so we can enjoy the beautiful mural we have in the classroom. So today we're going to talk about complex inheritance patterns, which are a little bit different than what Mendel learned about. This is 11.2 in case you choose to follow along in your book, which is always a really good idea. So Mendel got really lucky. He happened to choose traits that were all inherited through the basic inheritance patterns that he discovered. In modern times, we realize that there's a lot more complexity, and he just got really lucky to choose traits that are inherited the way that we now refer to as Mendelian inheritance, or in other words, basic. There's one gene, one trait, two alleles for that trait. One's dominant, one's recessive, the other one can cover up the dominant one, and it's all the rules that we followed. We now know that there's a lot that aren't that way. We saw some of those in the baby lab: hair curliness, skin color, the crazy traits lab with the purple skin color with the red and blue alleles. So there's some differences that are out there in the population that make it a little bit more difficult. And Mendel had these traits in the ones that he looked at. He might not have figured out the rules, and who knows when we would have discovered it. So let's dive in. The first one is incomplete dominance. In the baby lab, you saw this with curly hair and red hair. And in the crazy traits lab, you saw it with the skin color. So incomplete dominance is basically what the name describes. Normal dominance, one trait basically covers up or masks the other. In incomplete, neither a trait is capable of covering up the other one completely. So they both partially cover up. In other words, it's not fully dominant, it's incompletely dominant. So if someone's heterozygous, meaning they have two different alleles, they're going to express both traits a little bit. This is kind of some of the background of when people thought the traits were blended. It's not blended, the alleles stay separate, but the expression is blended. So a classic example of that is snapdragons. So snapdragon's a flower, and there's two different alleles. There's a red allele, and there is a white allele. And when these two red alleles, if an organism is heterozygous, meaning having one red allele and one white allele, what we see is that the offspring comes out pink, because the red allele cannot fully cover up the white. And so the red comes through a little bit, the white comes through a little bit, and you get pink. Notice, by the way, the way we write it here, we don't have to. We could do it real simple and do an R and a W, one for red, one for white. But we write it that way to indicate that it's the same gene of different alleles. We can't use a capital and a lowercase letter because neither one of them is dominant. And so if we do Mendel's typical cross, where we start with purebreds up here, a purebred red will have two red alleles. A purebred white will have two white alleles. And when they mate, the red parent will donate a red allele, the white parent will donate a white allele, and the offspring will be pink, all being heterozygous, one red, one white. When we cross two pink snapdragons, we see that we keep separate alleles. So in other words, Mendel's law of segregation still applies. There's two individual alleles, one red, one white. They didn't blend, but we have separate ones. And so it's possible they could get a red allele from one parent and a red allele from the other, and they would have red offspring about 25% of the time. They could also get a white allele from both parents, and 25% of the time we would expect white flowers. But it's also possible that the offspring could be heterozygous, and so consequently we would expect pink flowers. There's all kinds of traits like this that show examples, all of them behaving not by blending, by keeping the alleles together, and heterozygous, each one showing up a little bit. Another example would be in cats. And I know you all think I'm not so with cats, but there's just a lot of examples with domestic animals online. So blackness. So I'm going to start the slide over. So another example is with fur. We know a lot about domesticated animals because we study them and we breed them. So it's not that I'm a crazy cat lady, although I am. You all know that. But there's a lot online. So here's one example. So we have an allele for blackness. Black cats have two black alleles. Cats that have spots have a lot of spots, and they have two S alleles. They're mostly white because there's so many white spots that the white blends together, and there's just a couple of black areas. A heterozygous cat would have big patches because they would have black, they would have white, but they would have large patches. Another example would be horses. So we have a white horse, which would be heterozygous for whiteness. A chestnut horse would be heterozygous for chestnut or brown, essentially. And a golden palomino would be that light tan that would be the brown showing through a little bit, the white showing through a little bit, and combining it together to get golden palomino. Another example we saw is co-dominance. So in the Crazy Traits lab, there was a red-eyed allele, a green-eyed allele, and when an organism was heterozygous, they had one red eye and one green eye. And so that's their co-dominant, or they're together dominant. So what that means is that both alleles express themselves fully. Neither one can be covered up, and neither one shows up a little bit. They're both there. And so brindle fur in organisms is a good example of this. So this is a close-up of I think it's probably a Great Dane. You'll notice that if you were to stand back, this would look kind of like a dark tan dog. But the individual hairs, there are some that are tan and some that are black. So if we go to the red and black, the red and white from incomplete, instead of incomplete dominance where there would be red and white and making pink, in codominance, there's red alleles, there's white alleles, and when they're both present in a heterozygous organism, they both show up. If you stand back quite a ways, that box looks pink, but close up, and that box, you're going to see that there's red bits and white bits. So the classic example is blood type. So in blood type, there's a couple things going on with blood type, but in blood type, there's two main alleles. Well, there's three, but for two of them, there's blood type A, there's blood type B, and when an organism is heterozygous, they have blood type AB. The I gets a little funky. We write it with an I with a superscript A or B. For tradition, it has to do with the immune system. If you want to just write A and B, that's totally cool. Excuse me. So, blood type individuals who have blood type A have antigens on them that are blood type A, which means that blood type B would make them sick. Individuals who have blood type B have B antigens, which means the blood type A would make them sick. And individuals who have blood type AB have both. We'll talk about O in a couple minutes. So if we look at brindle fur, here we have a Great Dane. There's a black Great Dane, and there is, I'm not sure that that's fully a Great Dane, but there's a tan Great Dane, and together, their offspring would be what we call brindle, where there's black bits and tan bits. You see it again in horses. Gray horse with a white horse makes this Appaloosa horse where there's white and gray parts. Not light gray, but white parts and gray parts. Finally, the last thing we're going to talk about today is multiple alleles. So we know that for normal Mendelian traits, there are 2 alleles for every gene, recessive and dominant. In cases where there are multiple alleles, that means that there's more than 2. So individuals within the population still have just 2 alleles, but within the whole population, there are 2 out there. So for example, each person has one from mom, one from dad, but there's more possibilities than just tall or dark or light or brown. This is very, very common. In fact, almost surprising that Mendel could find 7 traits that only had 2 alleles, because most things have more than that. When we have multiple alleles, then there's a ranked dominance, meaning something is most dominant, other things are recessive to everything. So there's lots of examples. Once again, fur color. For animals, there's lots of fur patterns. Many of them have multiple alleles. Blood type, we'll come back to that again. So if we look at here, this is a chinchilla, kind of like a rabbit. Maybe those are rabbits. Okay. So here's an example. If we look at these rodents, I think they're rabbits. They might be chinchillas, but they look like rabbits to me. We have essentially 4 alleles. So if we look at this, we have a albino allele. That albino allele means it's recessive to everything. If you notice, the only genotype that results in an albino rabbit is little c, little c. We have here then a Himalayan allele. Notice we're using, once again, a letter with a superscript because we're showing that it's one gene that we're talking about that has multiple alleles. So here, the Himalayan allele appears to be dominant to albino, but recessive to all of the other choices. We have a light gray allele, which looks like almost like it's inherited through a little bit of incomplete dominance. Because here we see that it seems to be only in heterozygous individuals. We have a chinchilla allele, which it looks like the same allele, but maybe this is, like I said, incomplete or co-dominance. And finally, we have this dark gray with a capital C, and so there is a ranked system. We won't look at anything quite this complicated. Another example, once again, we have a cat example. We have black cats, which is dominant. We have cinnamon cats, which is this light color. And then we have the chocolate or the brown cat. So the ranked dominance, I draw the greater than symbols in there because it makes it easier for me to keep track of. So we have capital B, or black, is dominant to everything. Chocolate is dominant to cinnamon, and cinnamon is recessive to everything. So when we look at some examples, here we've got a black cat. The black cat could be homozygous for blackness, could be heterozygous with either the cinnamon allele or the brown allele. So the cinnamon allele we're representing with this little apostrophe right here. Then we have this brown cat. Brown cat has to have a B without, so a little b without an apostrophe, so the brown allele. So it could be homozygous for brown, or it could be heterozygous if the second allele is the cinnamon allele. Whereas cinnamon is recessive to everything. So the only way to get a cinnamon cat is to have two B's with apostrophes, or in other words, two cinnamon alleles. So the classic example that we'll use, and you'll see lots of problems with this, is blood type. One of the reasons is blood type is a really easy way to give a quick possibility. Can these two people be related? And so we can narrow down right away whether it's even possible for two people to be related based on what blood type they have. So blood type, as I mentioned before, is co-dominant. It's also got multiple alleles. So it's got blood type A, blood type B, and blood type O. If we do a ranking system, A is equal to B because it's co-dominant. So if you have A and B, remember they're going to both show up, but both of these are dominant to O. So when we look at this, we have blood type A. Blood type A can be homozygous for A, or heterozygous if blood type O is their other allele. Blood type B is the same. It can be homozygous for B, or heterozygous if blood type O. Notice we can write it this way. The official way is to write it with an I and an exclamation because it is just one gene. AB can only have one thing. It must have an A allele and a B allele. And O is recessive to both AB, so we can't have an O if either A or B is present because either one will mask that. So A is only written as OO. In this format up here where we have the I's, O is written with two undercase I's because I know scientists can't make anything simple. The last, I spoke before, one more trait today, and that's pleiotropy. Pleiotropy is a situation in which one single gene has multiple phenotypes. In other words, it affects several different traits. So sickle cell is a good example. Sickle cell causes flattened blood cells. It also causes anemia, weakness, a number of other conditions. We also have behind my picture, unfortunately you can't see over, oh gosh. So we'll splice that out. So we also have over here white cats. Once again, another phenotype. And one particular gene that could result in whiteness is one gene with two side effects. Has the first one just affects, hey, you've got white fur. The second allele would result in sometimes cats with white fur are deaf. You might also notice they have blue eyes. That has to do with the whiteness in their fur, their pigmentation. But the deafness would be our second trait. That's it. We'll save determining sex for our next podcast. Thanks for watching. Give me some feedback in class. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. And tomorrow we'll work on problems.